The rain hadn't decided yet. That was the thing about Portland in late October. The sky would hang low and gray for hours, pressing down on the city like a held breath, and you'd spend all afternoon waiting for it to commit. Ethan Calloway had learned to stop arguing with it. He just kept an extra jacket in his truck, one for himself, and one small orange one, with the broken zipper he'd been meaning to fix for 3 weeks, which was draped now over his daughter's shoulders as they walked the long way home through Riverside Park. He took the long way when the day had been hard. Today had been hard. The job out on Morrison Street had run 4 hours over because the HVAC unit in the basement turned out to be original to the 1960s building, and the parts he'd ordered 2 weeks ago were wrong, and the building manager, a short man named Gerald, who wore the same expression of patient disappointment, regardless of circumstances, had looked at Ethan in a way that suggested he was quietly revising his opinion of Calloway Home Services downward. Ethan had stayed until 7 fixing it. He'd charged Gerald only for 3 hours of labor, which he knew was too little, and he'd done it anyway, because that was how he was built, and because he couldn't afford to lose the referral. Lily was 8 years old and had been waiting at Mrs. Dunbar's apartment since 3:30. She hadn't complained. She never did. She'd made a drawing for Mrs. Dunbar's cat, a careful portrait in crayon that she'd titled, in wobbly capital letters, Mr. Whiskers in his natural habitat, depicting the cat in front of what appeared to be a tropical waterfall. She showed it to Ethan when he arrived and waited, perfectly still, while he looked at it with the seriousness it deserved. "He's never been to a waterfall," Ethan said. "That's the whole point," Lily said. "It's aspirational." He didn't always know where she got words like that. She was in 2nd grade. She read above her level and preferred nonfiction, which meant that conversations with her had, over the last year or so, begun to veer in unexpected directions. Last week she'd explained to him, in considerable detail, the process by which stars collapsed. She'd done it while eating a grilled cheese sandwich, and had not seemed to feel the contrast was unusual. They walked south through the park. The path was mostly empty, a jogger with earbuds, a man walking a large brown dog, who strained toward every leaf, and the air had that particular smell that rain gives the ground before it falls, something between copper and wood, something Ethan had always liked without ever finding the right word for. Lily walked beside him, with her hand tucked into the crease of his elbow, which she'd been doing since she was small, and which she'd apparently decided, at 8, she still had permission to do. He was grateful. He'd noticed recently that she was starting to check herself looking around before she reached for his hand in public, as if measuring herself against some invisible rule about what was still acceptable. He hoped she'd break that rule for a few more years. His phone buzzed. An email from his supplier about a delayed shipment. He turned the screen off and put it back in his pocket. "Mrs. Dunbar told me I have good hands," Lily said. "She's right. She said artists have hands that look like they're always reaching." Ethan glanced down at his daughter's hands, small, with paint still faintly visible in the crease of her left thumb. A scratch from 2 days ago on her right knuckle from the corner of a cabinet door. They were reaching, in their own way. Always. "Are you cold?" "No. A beat. A little." He pulled the orange jacket tighter across her shoulders, and she let him, leaning into the adjustment for a half-second before pulling away again, the way she did. They came around the curve of the main path, past the old stone fountain that hadn't worked in 3 years, and that was when Lily stopped walking. Ethan went 2 steps before he noticed. Lily, Bo, she still called him that, a habit from their neighbor, a Vietnamese woman named Lone, who'd watched Lily on Tuesday and Thursday mornings for the first 2 years of her life, and from whom Lily had absorbed approximately 40 words that she used with complete unself-consciousness. "Bo." "Look." He looked. At the far end of the park's main lawn, near the long wooden bench beside the flowering crabapple, a woman stood with her back partly turned toward them. She was dressed in a dark gray coat, the kind that was cut well and fell properly, and cost more than Ethan made in a week. Her hair was dark and pulled back at the base of her neck. From here, in the muted light, she looked like a photograph composed. Precise. Still, except her shoulders were moving, not trembling, exactly. Just moving. Rising and falling, with an unevenness that didn't belong in the posture of someone who otherwise held herself that still. She's crying, Lily said. He looked again. Maybe she's just cold. Lily gave him the look. She was 8 years old, and had not yet learned to be polite about the look, which was the look she gave when adults said something they didn't believe. She's crying, Bo. Okay. He glanced around. 2 other people were within 40 yards, a woman in a yellow raincoat who was looking at her phone, and an older man who was walking purposefully in the opposite direction. Neither had slowed. She probably just needs a minute. By herself? Sometimes people need to be sad by themselves. Lily considered this with the seriousness she brought to everything. I know, she said. But she doesn't look like she's choosing it. He didn't have an answer for that. He stood there a moment with his hand on his daughter's shoulder, watching a woman he'd never met stand very still at the far end of a park and grieve something he couldn't see, and he felt the exact familiar shape of the choice he was being asked to make, the one between the safe thing and the human thing. The one he always tried to make correctly and sometimes got wrong. Lily. But she was already walking. There were things Ethan knew about his daughter that he hadn't told anyone, because there was no one to tell. He knew that she checked on him at night. Sometimes he'd wake to the sound of his bedroom door opening very slightly, enough to let in a sliver of hallway light, and then closing again. She never said anything. She just looked. He pretended to be asleep because it seemed important that she not know he'd noticed, and because he wasn't sure what he'd say if she asked him why she felt the need to. He knew that she'd started keeping a small notebook in her coat pocket 4 months ago, after they'd gone to the botanical garden, and she'd seen a volunteer naturalist sketching insects in a field notebook with a stub of pencil. She'd asked the woman about it. The woman had explained that she wrote down things she wanted to remember, not big things, mostly, but small ones. The way a certain bee held its front legs, the sequence of colors in a flower's center. Memory is unreliable, the woman had told her. The notebook doesn't forget. Lily had started her own the following week and had not explained the notebook to Ethan until he'd asked about it, at which point she'd said, simply, I'm collecting things. He'd asked what kinds of things. Faces, mostly, she'd said, and what they're doing. He knew she carried in the right-hand pocket of her jacket, this jacket, the orange one, a small piece of folded paper. He'd seen her checking it once or twice, always putting it back carefully, and he'd never asked. He had a sense that it would mean something, and that the right moment hadn't arrived yet. He followed his daughter across the wet grass toward the woman at the bench. The woman didn't hear them at first. She was standing with her back, mostly turned. And the park had that particular soft quality that rainy days give to sound, everything muffled, edges rounded. Up close, what Ethan had taken for stillness was actually the opposite. She was working very hard to hold herself together, and the effort was visible in her neck and jaw, and in the way her hands gripped the strap of the bag at her side. She was somewhere between 35 and 40, he guessed. The coat was cashmere. The bag was the kind of bag that came in a cloth sleeve. None of that was what he noticed first. What he noticed first was how tired she was, not sleepy. The kind of tired that settles in behind the eyes and doesn't move. He recognized it because he'd felt it himself. In the year after Sarah left, after she'd sat him down at the kitchen table and explained, clearly and without cruelty, that she'd outgrown the life they'd built and that Lily would be better off in a home where the people in it were honest about who they were. He'd spent 6 months looking like a person who was fine. He'd been very, very tired. Lily stopped a few feet from the woman. She didn't rush. She waited. After a moment, some small shift in the air made the woman turn. Up close, her face was a careful thing, sharp at the cheekbones, controlled in the set of the mouth, the kind of face that had learned to give nothing away. Except right now it was giving everything away. The mascara had run and she hadn't fixed it. There were tear tracks drying on her cheeks. She looked at Lily the way people look at unexpected things, with a slight narrowing, a recalibration. Hi, Lily said. The woman blinked. Hello, I'm Lily. This is my dad. The woman glanced at Ethan. He did the only thing he could think to do, which was raise one hand in a gesture that was meant to convey. She came over here herself. I wasn't going to stop her. I apologize if this is intrusive. The woman looked back at Lily. You can keep crying if you want, Lily said. We don't mind. Something in the woman's face moved. not a smile. Something before a smile, like the muscle memory of one. "I'm Claire," she said. Her voice was steady, professional. Ethan suspected that voice was a reflex she'd spent years building. "Do you want to sit down?" Lily asked. Claire looked at the bench behind her, as if she'd forgotten it existed. Yes." She sat. The motion had something uncertain in it, like someone whose legs have given out slightly, and who is covering for it. Lily sat beside her, not touching her, leaving a deliberate inch of space. She took her small notebook from her pocket and held it in her lap. She didn't open it. Ethan stayed standing a few feet back, hands in his jacket pockets, watching his daughter handle something he wouldn't have known how to approach. "What's wrong?" Lily asked. "A lot of things," Claire said. "That's okay. You don't have to list them." Claire let out a small, fractured breath that might have been a laugh. "Good. Because I'm not sure I could." They sat in silence for a moment. The mizzling rain had thickened slightly, and was catching the last of the afternoon light, in a way that made the air look almost phosphorescent. "I have something," Lily said. She reached into the right-hand pocket of the orange jacket and withdrew the piece of folded paper. She unfolded it carefully, the way you'd unfold something you'd folded and refolded many times, along the same creases. Inside was a small drawing, not from Lily's notebook but separate, older, the paper more worn. Lily looked at it for a moment, and Ethan couldn't see her expression from where he stood. Then she held it out. "I've been carrying this for a while," she said, "but I think you need it more than I do." Claire took the paper from Lily's small hand, without thinking. She looked at it. It was a child's drawing clearly, unmistakably, a child's done in colored pencil, on ordinary notebook paper. Two figures. A taller one, and a smaller one, holding hands. The taller figure had long dark hair and a yellow dress. The smaller one had a gap-toothed smile that took up most of its face. They were standing somewhere with green around them, maybe a garden, maybe a park. In the sky above them, in the methodical balloon letters of someone learning the alphabet, were the words, "We are okay." Claire stared at the drawing. Her hands went still, the grip on the bag strap released. "Where did you get this?" Her voice had changed. Something had gone out of it, the professional steadiness, the reflex control. What was left was something smaller and rawer. "I drew it," Lily said, "about a year ago. When my dad was really sad for a while, I put it in my pocket to show him if he needed it. But he got better before I had to, so I just kept it." Ethan felt something move in his chest that he hadn't expected. He hadn't known about the drawing. He hadn't known she'd been watching him closely enough to prepare for him. Claire was still looking at the paper. Her breathing had changed. "The tall one," she said quietly. "The dark hair. That's who I was drawing," Lily said. "But it doesn't have to be her. It can be whoever you want it to be." Who? Claire stopped, restarted. "Who were you drawing?" "My mom," Lily said. Simply. The way children say the hardest things. She doesn't live with us anymore. But I used to think about what it would be like if she was okay wherever she was. And I was okay too. And that's what it looks like." Silence. The rain came down. Claire pressed the back of one hand against her mouth. Not to stop herself from speaking, to stop herself from coming apart completely in front of two strangers in a public park. Which Ethan understood was a real and specific fear. He'd felt it himself in the parking garage on the third floor of a hospital on a Wednesday in March 4 years ago, pressing his fist against his sternum while people walked past him to their cars. "I had a daughter," Claire said. "She would have been." She stopped. She was very small. She didn't. Another stop. 3 years ago. Lily didn't say anything. She reached out and put her hand on top of Claire's, not squeezing, not holding, just there, present. The weight of one small hand laid on top of something too large for anyone to hold alone. "The tall figure," Claire said. "In the drawing, it can be her," Lily said. "If you want." Standing somewhere with green. "Being okay." Claire bent her head. Her shoulders shook. But this time, it was different from before this time. The shaking wasn't the effort to suppress something. It was the sound of something being let through. Ethan looked away to give her the privacy of it, looking out across the wet grass toward the street, where a few cars passed in the late afternoon light, and he felt the particular texture of that moment, a moment too large for its own container, spilling over the edges of an ordinary Tuesday, in an ordinary park in a city where thousands of people walked past each other every day and almost never stopped. He had not expected this when they left Mrs. Dunbar's. He hadn't expected a lot of things over the last several years. That was the thing about children, they moved through the world without the filters adults spent their lives building. And sometimes they got through to places that the filters had been designed to protect, and sometimes that was the most necessary thing. She talked for a while, not continuously in pieces, the way people talk when they're not sure they have permission. Her name was Claire Ashworth. She'd built a company, a platform for healthcare logistics, matching small clinics and rural hospitals with equipment suppliers over the course of 11 years. She'd started it in her 20s with a business partner she'd met in graduate school, a man named Victor, who had, 6 months ago, taken the company they'd built together and walked into a board meeting with a restructuring proposal that gave him controlling interest and left her with a title and no authority. The legal battle that followed had consumed 4 months and most of her reserves, both financial and personal. The board had sided with Victor, citing a clause in their founding agreement that she was now being advised she should have read more carefully 15 years ago. She'd also lost, in the course of the last 18 months. Her marriage, not in a dramatic way, not in the way of betrayal or explosion, but in the quieter, and in some ways, worse way of two people who had grieved differently and never found their way back to each other. Marcus, her ex-husband, was now living in Boston. He called on Sundays. She appreciated the calls and didn't know what to say during them. The company, the marriage. And before those, the daughter who had lived for 4 days and then hadn't. She said the last part almost as an aside, the way you mention the thing that's actually the center of everything when you've been circling it for so long that the only way to say it is quickly, factually, without adequate preparation. Lily was quiet through all of it. She kept her hand on Claire's. Her notebook stayed closed. Ethan had at some point sat down on the other end of the bench, keeping distance, giving space. He listened without comment, the way he'd learned to listen in the years of raising a child alone, not as someone waiting to respond, but as someone bearing witness. "The drawing," Claire said finally, after a silence. "What made you decide to keep it in your pocket?" Lily thought about this. "I read in a book once that the things we make for people we love are actually still connected to that love, even when they're far away, like the feeling is inside the object." She paused. "I wanted to have it close in case my dad needed the feeling. But he was fine. So I kept it because it felt like something I was supposed to be ready to give." Claire looked at the drawing again. "You were carrying this for someone you don't know." "I was carrying it until I found out who it was for," Lily said. "That's different." The sound Claire made, Ethan wasn't sure what to call it. It wasn't crying, exactly. It was something before and past crying at the same time. A kind of arrival. "My daughter's name was going to be Fiona," Claire said. "We'd decided. She would have." She exhaled. "I don't know what she would have been like. I think about that sometimes. Whether she'd have been like me or different. I think about that about my mom," Lily said. "Whether she's different now than when she was here. Or if she's the same. Where is she?" "Seattle. She sends cards on my birthday." A pause. "I keep them. But I don't always read them right away. Sometimes I have to wait until I want to." Claire nodded slowly, like someone recognizing something. "If your daughter could see you right now," Lily said, "do you think she'd want you to be okay?" A simple question. A question only a child would ask directly, without hedging it, without softening it with qualifications about complexity and the validity of grief and the nuance of emotional processing. Just, if she could see you, would she want you to be okay? Claire didn't answer immediately. She sat with the question. The rain fell. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes. I think she would. Then maybe that's where you start." Lily said. Because she wants you to. So it's not just for you. It's for her too. A black car pulled to the curb at the park entrance. Not a car, an Escalade, dark windowed. The kind of vehicle that announced its own significance. It was followed, a moment later, by a second one. A tall man in a dark coat got out of the first, spoke briefly into a phone, and began walking across the park lawn with the particular unhurried speed of someone who had learned to move quickly without appearing to rush. Ethan watched this approaching. Behind the first man, a second. Behind him, a third. He looked at Claire. She had her eyes down, looking at the drawing. Miss Ashworth. The first man, early 40s, close-cropped hair. The specific practiced neutrality of someone whose job involved managing situations, stopped a few feet from the bench. We've been. He paused. Recalibrated. We've been looking for you. I know, Claire said. The board call was rescheduled for. I know, Marcus. She looked up at him. Tell them 40 minutes. Marcus, not the ex-husband, a different Marcus. This one, apparently her head of security, looked at Ethan and Lily with an expression that tried to be blank and didn't entirely succeed. He was reassessing something. Ethan could see the recalibration happening in real time. Yes, ma'am. He stepped back. He did not leave. By now, the arrival of two large black vehicles at the edge of a public park, combined with the presence of what was clearly some kind of security detail, had accomplished its predictable result. The handful of people in and near the park had slowed. Two were outright stopped, watching. Across the street, a delivery driver had pulled to the side and was craning his neck. The jogger with earbuds had looped back around and was standing 40 yards away. Hands on knees, not jogging, stopped traffic. Ethan thought that this was what the phrase actually meant. Not the vehicles, not the drama, but the moment when the mundane world pauses because it has sensed that something real is happening, and it doesn't want to miss it. Claire looked at Ethan. I'm sorry, she said. For the she gestured vaguely at the Escalades, the security team, the small gathering audience. It's fine. I don't usually. She stopped. I don't usually sit in public parks. Apparently you should, he said. She looked at him for a moment, and then she laughed. A real laugh, short and slightly disbelieving, the kind that surprises the person doing it. She pressed her hand over her mouth after, as if to check it, and then shook her head slightly. I'm sorry, she said again, but differently this time. I've been. She stopped. These past few months I've been walking around inside my own head, like it's the only room in the building. I forgot there were other people in the world. That happens, Ethan said. Does it happen to you? He thought about the HVAC unit on Morrison Street. He thought about the invoice he'd charged Gerald for 3 hours when it should have been 7. He thought about the orange jacket with the broken zipper and the delayed shipment and the long way home through the park and the 40 words his daughter had learned from a neighbor and the drawing he hadn't known she'd carrying for him for a year. All the time, he said. Claire asked about them. It started small. She asked Lily if she'd always carried her notebook. And Lily explained the naturalist at the botanical garden and the idea about collecting faces, and this somehow became a 20-minute conversation about memory and what you choose to keep. Claire listened to Lily the way adults listen to children when they've stopped waiting for the child to say something interesting and have realized the interesting part already happened a few sentences back. Do you ever draw people without them knowing? Claire asked. Sometimes, Lily said. Mostly in waiting rooms. People in waiting rooms have very honest faces because they're distracted by worrying. Claire considered this. What do you do with the drawings? Keep them. They're not for anything. They're just evidence. She turned the notebook page, showing a quick sketch of the street beyond the park. 2 parked cars, a traffic light. A woman with an umbrella who'd been there 10 minutes ago and was now gone. Like, proof that they existed in that particular moment, on that particular day. Even if nobody else saw it. That's a beautiful thing to do, Claire said. She said it without reaching for it, which made it land. Lily looked at her and then back at the notebook. My dad does it differently. He remembers things by fixing them. What do you mean? Ethan felt himself pulled into the conversation before he'd decided to join it. She means... He stopped. I don't know what she means, actually. You remember people by fixing their things, Lily said patiently. Like how you memorized Mrs. Dunbar's radiator schedule so you could tell if something was off before she noticed. And you fixed the window latch at the Garcias for free because Mr. Garcia had a bad knee and couldn't sleep if there was a draft. She glanced at him. You collect people by taking care of things. He didn't have an answer for that. He sat with it. Claire was watching him, not the way people watched him when they were assessing him, calculating with the slightly unfocused attention of someone who was recognizing something at an angle, catching it in peripheral vision. Then she asked Ethan how long he'd been doing this maintenance, repair work, running his own service. 3 years on my own, he said. Before that, I was at a structural engineering firm. Claire was quiet for a second. You left? Sarah Lily's mom when she left. It became clear that the engineering job and raising a kid alone weren't going to fit together. The hours weren't flexible. The firm wasn't. He paused. It wasn't flexible. So I built something that was. You gave up structural engineering to do HVAC maintenance. He looked at her directly. I gave up a career to raise my kid. The HVAC maintenance is how I pay for it. She held his gaze. Something in her expression, he'd noticed it a few times in the past 20 minutes, was the expression of someone watching a thing be done simply that they had believed was very complicated. I'm sorry. That wasn't a judgment. I know. A pause. The security detail maintained its tactful distance. Marcus had positioned himself by the park entrance with the practiced invisibility of someone very good at his job, close enough to intervene, far enough not to crowd them. How long have you been building Callaway Home Services? Claire asked. 3 years. Started with one contract. Word of mouth, mostly. It's not large. It works. Does it work because you're good, or because you charge less than you should? He looked at her. Probably both. She nodded, slowly. I did that too. Early on. I undercharged because I was afraid that the real price would make the client hesitate. And I'd rather have the certainty than the margin. She turned her coffee cup in her hands. It took me 4 years to learn that underpricing is a form of apology. You're apologizing for taking up space in someone's budget. He hadn't thought of it that way. The 3-hour invoice he'd given Gerald sat in his memory with a slightly different weight. I built a company, she said. 11 years. I was 26, and I thought if I worked hard enough and was smart enough and correct enough, I could make something that mattered. And I did. I think it mattered. And then someone took it. Not the idea, Ethan said. Not the 11 years. No. Just the company. Then you still have the thing that built the company. She looked at him. Not with the look of someone who's been offered comfort. With the look of someone who's been told something true and is trying to figure out if they'd already known it. You do this often? Talk people down off ledges? First time, he said. You're good at it. That's my daughter's work, not mine. He looked at Lily, who was now sketching something in her notebook, glancing up occasionally at the street to check her reference. I just follow her. Lily didn't look up, but she said, I can hear you, in the flat tone of a child who has learned that adults sometimes forget this. Claire laughed again. This time she didn't cover her mouth. I want to help, she said. I know that might sound... She stopped. I'm aware that I'm a stranger who started crying in a park, and your daughter gave me something precious, and I want to make sure that another stop. She seemed to be fighting her professional instincts, the instinct to frame everything as a transaction, to lead with the offer before the feeling. I don't know how to do this correctly. You're doing fine, Ethan said. I want to offer you something. I don't want it to be, she searched for the word. Condescending. Or transactional. Miss Ashworth. Claire. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on knees. I'm not going to say no to help on principle if the help is real. I'm also not going to say yes to something because I feel I owe you, so just tell me what you're thinking. She nodded. This seemed to be the right answer. The way her shoulders settled slightly, when he said it, some held tension releasing. She'd been braced for something, he realized. For the kind of pride that refuses as a way of keeping score. Okay, straight then. She took a breath. I still own equity in the company. I'm legally prevented from running it, but I'm not legally prevented from consulting or from starting something adjacent. I have relationships with every hospital network and clinic operator on the West Coast. I'm going to rebuild. A pause. I need people I can trust. People who've built things. People who understand what it's like to have something fall apart and keep moving anyway. I fix HVAC units. You're a structural engineer who chose to be present for his daughter. That's a different kind of problem solving than most people I've hired. She held his gaze. I'm not offering you anything definitive today. I'm not even sure what I'm building yet. But I'd like to know if you'd be willing to have a conversation. A real one. Not an interview. Just. She gestured vaguely. A conversation. Ethan was quiet for a moment. He thought about Gerald and his expression of patient disappointment. He thought about the wrong parts and the 3-hour invoice that was 3 hours short of honest. He thought about Lily's notebook in the botanical garden and the 40 words and the drawing he hadn't known she'd been carrying for a year. He thought about underpricing as a form of apology. He thought about what it would mean to stop apologizing for taking up space in Gerald's budget, in someone's calendar, in the world, and to charge the real price instead. He didn't know yet if he was ready. He thought he might be getting there. Yeah, he said. A conversation sounds fine. They left the park 40 minutes later. The Escalades were still there when they went, and Marcus, the security person, raised a hand in what might have been a farewell, and 2 of the people who'd been watching from the street had apparently decided this was over and left, but one, a woman in a red coat, was still standing there with her hands in her pockets, watching, in the particular posture of someone who has been moved by something and doesn't want to walk away from it yet. Lily looked back once. She kept the drawing, she said. I saw. Good. She tucked her hand back into the crease of his elbow. I thought she would. They walked in silence for a block. You gave her something you made for me, Ethan said. You didn't need it anymore. A pause. She did. He thought about saying something about that, about the fact that she'd been carrying a drawing for him, had been watching him closely enough to prepare for him, had been ready in her 8-year-old way to come to his aid if the sadness got to be too much. He thought about saying that he was sorry she'd felt she needed to watch him that carefully, and also that he was grateful, and also that he wasn't sure how he'd produce someone so attentive and specific and quietly fierce. He didn't say any of it. Some things were for keeping. She was really sad, Lily said. She had a lot of reasons. I know, she told us. She thought for a moment. I think some people don't know they're allowed to stop for a while. Like they think if they stop moving, everything falls down. Some people are afraid of that. Yeah, but it doesn't, right? Usually it doesn't fall down just because you stop. He thought about the 3 years since Sarah left, the broken zipper, the 40 words, the drawing in the pocket of the orange jacket. Usually it doesn't, he said. It might look different when you come back to it. But it doesn't fall down. Lily nodded, satisfied. That's what I thought. 2 more blocks. Bo? Yeah. Do you think she'll be okay? He thought about Claire Ashworth sitting in a park in a cashmere coat with mascara on her cheeks and a child's drawing in her hands, laughing at something with a laugh that surprised her. He thought about the way she'd said straight then, like someone remembering a skill she'd been told she no longer needed. Yeah, he said. I think she'll be okay. Me too. A pause. She just needed someone to stop. The call came on a Thursday morning in February, which meant it came while Ethan was in the middle of replacing a pump assembly in the basement of a dental office on Hawthorne. And he almost didn't pick up. He picked up. It was a woman named Denise Okafor, who identified herself as the chief of staff for a new venture called Bridgeline Health Logistics. She explained that Bridgeline was in its early formation phase, that they were building a team to support clinical infrastructure, consulting, that they were looking for people with engineering backgrounds and field experience, people who understood the practical side of what they were advising on. We found your name through a referral, Denise said. Are you interested in a conversation? Depends on the conversation, Ethan said. From the floor of a dental office basement. Pump assembly in his lap. Denise laughed. Fair enough. Our CEO says you'd say something like that. The conversation took 3 weeks to actually happen, one cancellation on his side when a burst pipe in an apartment complex on Division Street kept him busy for 12 hours, one rescheduling on theirs, and when it finally did happen, it was in a coffee shop on Alberta Street on a Tuesday afternoon, after Ethan had dropped Lily at her after-school program. He'd worn the same jacket he always wore because he didn't own a different one, and had decided, on the walk over, that this was actually fine. Denise turned out to be a small, precise woman in her early 40s, who asked questions like she was building something, each one placed carefully on top of the last, testing for load-bearing capacity, before adding the next. She wanted to know about his engineering background. Yes, but she asked about it in terms of how he'd applied it since leaving the firm. She wanted to know which of his current clients had referred others, and why he thought they had. She wanted to know what problems in his current work he found interesting, and which ones he found dull, and whether that ratio bothered him. By the end, she had a reasonably complete picture of how he thought. There's a gap, she told him, between what the healthcare infrastructure consultants understand theoretically and what the field actually looks like. The clinics we're targeting aren't hospitals. They're running 20-year-old systems with two-person maintenance crews who've been solving problems with duct tape for a decade. The consultants we've been interviewing understand specifications. They don't understand what happens when the specification meets actual conditions. I understand what happens, Ethan said. I know, Denise said. That's why we called. He started as a part-time infrastructure consultant 3 months later, 2 days a week at first, and then more, as it became clear he was good at it, at translating the gap between what the plan said and what the buildings actually were, between the theoretical requirements and the practical constraints, between the engineers who designed systems and the people who had to maintain them. It turned out that 3 years of fixing things that were broken had given him a fluency in that gap that was genuinely valuable. He kept Callaway Home Services. He scaled it down, hired a part-time tech named Brandon, 22 years old, recently certified, extremely enthusiastic about condensers in a way that Ethan found quietly encouraging to cover the smaller jobs, and kept the accounts he'd built over 3 years. Gerald on Morrison Street stayed a client, and occasionally, Ethan noticed, nodded at him with something that might have been respect. He'd started billing Gerald correctly. He wasn't sure Gerald had noticed, but he felt better about the invoices. Lily started at a new school that fall a small K-8, with an arts integration program that Ethan had found through a network of Portland parents that Denise had quietly pointed him toward. The school had a naturalist residency program, which meant that every spring a working naturalist spent 2 weeks with each grade. The first time it happened, Lily came home and described the experience in such detail that Ethan had to ask her to pause and eat her dinner between sentences. She'd shown the naturalist her notebook. The naturalist had asked if she could photograph some of the pages. Lily had said yes, but only if she got a copy. They came back to the park on a Saturday in March, when the weather had turned into something tentatively approaching warmth, the sky pale blue and the air still cold, but in the way that hinted it was tired of being cold and was reconsidering. Claire was already there. She was sitting on the same bench, which Ethan noticed she seemed to have chosen deliberately the same one, same end. She was wearing a different coat, lighter, a soft green that seemed at odds with her general aesthetic and suited her exactly. She had a coffee. She'd brought one for each of them, which she held out as they approached. Lily took the coffee. She would drink approximately 4 sips and then lose interest, which had been happening since she was 6, and which Ethan had accepted as a ritual, and sat down beside Claire, in the same way she'd sat that first afternoon. Close, but not touching. Deliberate space, her notebook already in her lap. You look different, Lily told Claire. I've been sleeping, Claire said. Good, you can tell. Claire smiled. It was a different smile than it had been in October, less guarded, less a thing she'd decided to show and more a thing that simply appeared. She'd been doing that more, Ethan had noticed over the intervening months, deciding things less, letting them happen more. It was a small change, invisible to people who hadn't seen her before. He noticed it every time. Bridgeline is official, she said to Ethan. We filed Tuesday. The beta pilot with the Cascades Clinic network starts in May. good timeline. It's an aggressive timeline, and we both know it." She looked at him. "Denise says you've been useful. Denise is generous. Denise is precise. She doesn't use words generously." She held her coffee with both hands, looking out at the park, the fountain, the crabapple, the jogger who was probably a different jogger than the one from October, but who occupied the same stretch of path. "How's Lily's school?" "She's writing a field guide to Pacific Northwest pollinators," Ethan said. "For fun." Claire looked at Lily, who was sketching something in her notebook without looking up. "Is it good?" "It's extremely thorough," Lily said, still sketching. "I'm on chapter 4. Bumblebees." She paused. "Their ears are on their legs." "I thought you'd want to know." "I did want to know," Claire said, with the same note of delighted surprise she always seemed to have when Lily told her things. Like, she kept expecting the surprises to stop, and they kept not stopping. They sat in the March light for a while. It was the comfortable kind of quiet, the kind that didn't need to be filled, that three people can share when they've arrived at some understanding that doesn't require constant maintenance. Ethan had experienced this rarely enough in his life to notice it when it happened. He noticed it now. A woman across the park was throwing a ball for a border collie, who was running with the full commitment of an animal that has decided this is the most important task in the world. Lily watched the dog for a moment, and then went back to her sketching. At some point, Claire reached into her bag and set something on the bench between them, the folded paper. Worn at the creases now, soft with handling, the color of it slightly warmer than new white. "I've been carrying it," she said. "I thought you should know." "I know," Lily said. "You told me in December. I wanted to say it again." She paused. "I think I say important things more than once now. I used to think once was sufficient." "Once is never sufficient," Lily said. "That's why people write books. Because they already said it in shorter ways and it wasn't enough." She looked up from her notebook. "I read that, in a book." Claire laughed. Ethan laughed. Lily looked at them both with the expression of someone who has made a joke they are genuinely uncertain about. "It was in a book," she said again, slightly defensively. "I believe you," Claire said. "Good." She went back to her drawing. "You should." The fountain was still broken. The crabapple was beginning, barely, to show the first suggestions of bud too early, probably. And they'd likely get another frost that would set it back, but they were there. Small, pale, the color of something that hadn't decided what it was going to be yet. Ethan found himself looking at them for a moment longer than necessary, thinking about how much of life looked like that. Things that hadn't decided yet, holding on through one more cold spell, committed to the general direction of spring, even without certainty about the timing. At some point, Lily closed her notebook and held it in her lap, and Ethan noticed that she'd stopped sketching not because she'd finished but because she wanted to be present. She sat watching the park with her chin slightly raised, her eyes moving with the unhurried focus of someone building a memory deliberately, the way you do when you know at 8 years old, in the specific wisdom that children sometimes carry without knowing where it came from, that some moments are the kind you want to hold exactly as they are. Claire reached over and placed her hand on top of Lily's notebook, a small and deliberate gesture, the way she'd placed Lily's hand on her own that first rainy afternoon in October. "Present. Here, Fiona," Claire said quietly, looking at the taller figure in the drawing. The dark hair, the yellow dress, the gap-toothed smile. "I told her about you," she said to Lily. "In my way." Lily looked up. "What did you tell her?" "I told her there was a girl in a park who knew how to look at people." A pause. "And that the girl gave me something to carry. And that I'd carried it until I felt better." She folded the paper back along its creases, put it in her coat pocket. "And that I thought she would have liked you." Lily thought about this with the seriousness she brought to everything. "I would have liked her too," she said. "Probably a lot." Claire pressed her lips together, nodded once. The sun moved through the clouds and lit the bench for a moment, that sudden, specific brightness that feels personal, like it landed here and nowhere else, and then passed. They stayed. "We are okay." Not because the hard things hadn't happened, not because everything was fixed or healed or resolved into the clean lines of a good outcome, The company was still being rebuilt. The marriage was still over. Fiona was still 3 years gone and always would be. And Sarah was still in Seattle. And some mornings Ethan still woke up tired in the way that had nothing to do with sleep. But 3 people were sitting on a bench in a park in March, with broken fountain and crabapple buds and a child's drawing in a pocket. And one of them was starting a company that would matter, and one of them was writing a field guide to bees for fun, and one of them was drinking coffee from a cup he held with both hands, the way he did when something felt like it was worth holding carefully. "We are okay." The girl with collecting eyes had written it in balloon letters a year ago for someone who needed it, and she'd carried it until she found out who, and she'd been right. Not because she'd planned it, or prepared for it, or reasoned her way toward it, but because she'd learned, somehow, in the specific way that children learn things before they have the words to explain them, that love you make and store in your pocket doesn't go to waste. It waits. It finds its person. It arrives exactly when the timing is right. On a rainy Tuesday in a public park. In the hands of a girl who has been watching the world's faces long enough to know which one is asking. A small action. A life received. A border collie retrieved a ball across the wet grass and ran back with its whole body wagging, because it had been asked to do the thing it was made for, and it had done it, and that was enough. That was everything. That was the whole story. The crabapple waited for spring.